You ever get a knock at 4 a.m. that makes you think the world's ending? Yeah, that happened to me. My doorbell camera lit up like a slot machine, and pounding on the door sounded like either an emergency or someone about to confess a crime. I swing the door open, half asleep, and there's Karen from across the cul-de-sac, screeching that her guests couldn't park in my driveway because my SUV blocked them. I blinked. Calmly, I told her, "This is my driveway." She whipped out her phone, dialed 911, and screamed for the entire block that I was violating some mystical law of neighborhood harmony. So, there I was, standing in the freezing dark, slippers on, watching red and blue lights creep down the street over a parking spot I never signed up for. I'd only lived in the neighborhood a few months, just enough to notice the HOA's endless bulletins about lawn height, mailbox paint, and which bushes were socially acceptable, but not enough to expect my sleep would be shattered by a neighbor who thought my property belonged to her hospitality empire. I parked my SUV at the base of my driveway, where it always fit alongside my truck and occasional fishing trailer, never blocking the road, never bothering anyone. But that night, Karen decided to host a late-night gathering. Her sister was in town with a dozen friends, and apparently, it was beneath her dignity for them to use curbside spaces. No, they needed my driveway lined up like a parade, and I politely refused. That, of course, triggered the 4 a.m. drama. The police arrived. The younger officer looked skeptical as Karen flailed, gesturing at my SUV like it was a barricade. I almost laughed. She was claiming her guests were endangered by a perfectly parked vehicle. I counted 4 open curbside spaces. Absurdity was Karen's specialty. The officer asked questions, ID, ownership, why I refused. I pointed at my concrete driveway, calmly explained it was private property, and that I wasn't moving my vehicle for a party host who overbooked public space. Karen shrieked about HOA bylaws requiring driveways for guest overflow. First I'd ever heard of such a rule. I suggested we check the HOA welcome packet together. Meanwhile, my doorbell camera silently recorded every word. The older officer asked sharper questions. Had she read the bylaws? Did she understand that 911 isn't for neighborhood squabbles? She sputtered, waving her phone, doubling down on her story. The younger officer mumbled about a possible citation. I calmly offered my deed and county parcel map, showing the driveway was mine. Their expressions shifted. The conversation tilted in my favor, though Karen buzzed like a live wire. I stepped inside, returned with a folder of papers, and laid my property map on the hood of the cruiser. Black and white, clear as day. Karen protested, claimed the HOA trumped county lines. The older officer raised an eyebrow. I wasn't moving. Not now, not ever. Karen huffed, stomped, muttered about taking it to the board. The officers left, and for a brief moment, peace returned, but I knew this was only the opening act. Morning brought the neighborhood group chat. Messages painted me as a villain, all courtesy of Karen's flair for drama. I scrolled through accusations of hostility and endangering community spirit, while neutral emojis silently mocked her. Theatrics. The HOA emailed, summoning me to a sunrise meeting. Ignoring it wasn't an option. I printed bylaws, tucked them with my deed papers, and prepared. I stopped by Tom, a retired sheriff deputy, for advice. He said document everything: messages, incidents, timestamps. Paper trails win when emotions fail. That afternoon, I arrived at the clubhouse. Karen stood front and center, blazer too formal, relishing the stage. She launched into a monologue about safety, respect, trauma, and my aggression. The HOA president, Leonard, nervously tried to moderate. I didn't raise my voice. I opened my folder, laid out the bylaws, showed the quiet hours clause, and pointed out that 4 a.m. door pounding and 911 calls were the only violations. Karen tried to interject, handing out sheets she claimed were official. I noticed sloppy wording, mismatched bylaw references. A bluff. I called it out. Room murmurs. Some neighbors leaned in, seeing cracks in her narrative. I presented doorbell footage, timestamps, police reports. Tom reminded everyone about misuse of 911. Karen's face flushed crimson. Her confidence faltered. Then came a surprise twist. One of her guests claimed their car was scratched near my mailbox. I calmly asked for proof. They showed a blurry dark photo. I pulled another camera angle. Clearly, Their car had clipped the mailbox. Gasps. Karen tried to claim I doctored the footage. Leonard overruled. Sympathy flickered among neutral neighbors. Karen refused to surrender, claiming police might cite me. Her threats sounded hollow now. Subsequent messages and HOA complaints followed. Frivolous allegations about vehicle size, aesthetics, zoning violations. Each time, I documented everything meticulously. One of her guests eventually knocked, admitting the chaos had been misrepresented. Karen was attempting a smear campaign, alleging video tampering. Tom advised backups, multiple copies, chain of custody proof. I did it all, labeling every file. Another HOA session. Karen presented falsified bylaws, trying to intimidate me. I compared them to the official packet, printed, side by side, and calmly exposed the forgery. The room went silent. Karen sputtered. The pattern of lies and false complaints was undeniable. I let the evidence speak. Then I discovered the easement. Line along the edge of her yard, technically my property. Her pillars, signage, landscaping, built on land she didn't own. Poetic justice. I had no interest in revenge, but knowing she'd unknowingly trespassed gave me leverage she never expected. Subsequent HOA meetings cemented the outcome. Karen was censured. Her credibility collapsed. Neighbors who'd avoided confrontation began showing subtle support, nods, waves, even small gestures like shared pies. The tide had shifted. Karen's remaining influence dwindled. A professional survey confirmed the easement and boundaries. Her decorative pillars, signs, and stone borders sat squarely on my property. Publicly, her empire crumbled. Leonard and the board enforced removal of all encroachments. Karen raged, but everyone had seen the facts. She was isolated. Her intimidation evaporated. In the aftermath, the neighborhood found balance. People smiled, waved, and for the first time in months, my driveway and my peace were respected. The HOA implemented clearer rules on quiet hours, private driveways, and guest parking. Karen's last attempts at theatrics were ignored, her influence gone. Looking back, it's remarkable how a single 4 a.m. knock spiraled into months of drama. By standing firm, documenting facts, and leveraging truth over theatrics, I didn't just defend my SUV, I reshaped the neighborhood's perception of fairness. Karen tried to bulldoze boundaries, but patience, evidence, and calm persistence won. So yeah, my driveway stayed mine. The neighborhood regained sanity, and the lesson was clear: respect, evidence, and patience beat arrogance every time. And if you've ever dealt with your own HOA, Karen, you know exactly what I mean. Share your stories in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from, and let's see who else has survived the madness. After the dust settled from the easement revelation, you'd think Karen would finally back off, right? Wrong. Her pride didn't allow retreat. She started pacing her yard, muttering about how I manipulated the board and rigged the system, trying to convince anyone who would listen that I had powers in city government or some secret connections. I didn't respond. I just kept documenting, keeping every interaction neat, time-stamped, filed. Let her spin. Truth had a way of shining through. Eventually, one afternoon, Tom and I were sitting on my porch, coffee in hand, the sun dipping low, when he said something that stuck. Mercy sometimes wins more than retaliation. You've got the upper hand. Don't blow it by playing her game. And he was right. I had every legal card, every documented complaint, every piece of proof stacked neatly. But I didn't need to crush her with it just yet. Patience was a weapon, and she was using her hubris to dig her own hole. Then came the next curveball. Karen slipped a letter under my door. Big, dramatic legalese, talking about defamation, harassment, emotional damages. No lawyer, no notarization, just her signature. She paraded it around the neighborhood like a threat. I showed it to Tom. He laughed, drafted a small statement, reminding her of frivolous lawsuit consequences. I didn't even need to send it. Word got around that her lawsuit had no teeth. Her credibility eroded even further. A few days later, while reviewing my deed with fresh eyes, I noticed something I'd skimmed before. The easement line wasn't just a technicality. That narrow strip of land she had decorated, pillars, landscaping, the little guest parking sign she loved to brandish, was technically mine. At first I laughed at the absurdity, but then I realized this was poetic justice. She had ignored the most important boundary while obsessing over every curb. I showed Tom. He grinned, told me it was perfect leverage, though I had no interest in immediate retaliation. The next HOA meeting was different. Karen sat in the corner, arms crossed, glaring at anyone who dared challenge her. I didn't need to speak much. Leonard led discussions about new guidelines, and I quietly handed over the survey map, highlighting the easement, explaining I had no plans to act immediately, but now that it existed on record, continued harassment would have consequences. The room felt heavier. Neighbors were suddenly aware of her encroachment. Whispers spread like wildfire. Within a day, half the neighborhood knew about the easement. Karen stormed to my door, voice shaking, demanding to know if it was true. I didn't raise my voice. I calmly said, "Records speak for themselves. I've been patient longer than most would be." She sputtered about fairness, how she beautified that strip of land for years, how I was ungrateful. I didn't take the bait. I just reminded her, actions have consequences, respect is mutual. She stormed off, shrill but diminished. Then something remarkable happened. Neighbors who had stayed quiet for months started showing subtle support. A few waved from driveways, some nodded in passing, and one even invited me to a casual barbecue, quietly siding with stability over drama. It was small, but it mattered. The social balance was tipping, and I didn't have to argue for it. Just let her implode on her own arrogance. Meanwhile, Leonard called a private session, cautiously explaining that the board wanted to adopt clearer rules for overnight quiet hours and guest parking to avoid future conflicts. I agreed. Clarity was a shield against the next. Karen. He hinted the board was distancing itself from her. I thanked him, but I stayed alert. I knew her next move would be reckless. Sure enough, Karen escalated again, trying to frame a lawsuit. But this time I was ready. Every backup, every timestamp, every camera clip, every inspection report, all in place. Her attempts at intimidation had lost power. She had no leverage left. And then, I noticed another subtle opportunity in the easement. She had built permanent decorative elements right on land I technically controlled. I could have forced removal, but I didn't. Just letting her know it existed was enough leverage to keep her in check. The final act came quietly, in the early morning light. Leonard showed up with a stack of HOA paperwork, a professional survey of all neighborhood property lines. Karen wasn't present. The survey confirmed the easement, and her pillars, signage, and stone borders were all on my land. Publicly, it was indisputable. Her protests were meaningless. She was exposed, and the board had to enforce removal. Within a week, she received official notice. Remove all encroachments. Cease using the strip for guest parking. Copied to the insurance carrier. Her influence evaporated. The neighborhood changed overnight. People who once avoided me now smiled, waved, and stopped to chat. A pie appeared on my porch from a neighbor who had previously stayed distant, laughing about how the drama had ironically brought everyone closer. Karen sulked behind drawn curtains, occasionally peeking, but the stage was gone. Her group chat rants went ignored. Her power had collapsed under the weight of her own hubris. I finally relaxed, parked my SUV where it belonged, never moved it for anyone, installed a motion light. At the edge of the garage, not paranoia, just calm vigilance. Tom and I celebrated quietly on the porch, coffee in hand, watching sunsets. He reminded me it wasn't brute force that won, but patience, documentation, and letting Karen's arrogance do the work for me. The HOA passed new guidelines clearly defining driveways, quiet hours, and guest parking, rules that would protect everyone from future power plays. The last time I saw Karen up close, she tried hosting another gathering. Cars lined the street, not one in my driveway. She avoided my gaze, her voice subdued. The war was over, not with a bang, but with the quiet understanding that her influence was gone. I closed my door, went to bed early, and slept peacefully for the first time in months. Looking back, it's all a lesson in boundaries, concrete ones of property lines, and personal ones of respect and patience. Karen tried to bulldoze both, believing volume and intimidation would win. But steady resistance, undeniable proof, and patience won the day. She was left with nothing but her own echoes. I kept my driveway, my SUV, and a neighborhood finally at peace. And the moral? Sometimes the strongest power isn't confrontation, it's calm, prepared persistence, letting the truth unfold and your own evidence speak. So if you've ever had a neighbor like Karen, take notes, patience, and documentation will always outlast arrogance.